The gunshot that ended Winifred Everhart's husband echoed through the Colorado mountains 3 days before the blizzard swallowed the world whole. And now, she rode through white hell with his child growing inside her belly, and nowhere left to go but forward. The mare beneath her had stopped fighting an hour ago, resigned to trudging through snow that reached past her knees while wind screamed through the pines like all the devils in creation. Winifred could barely see past the horse's ears, her eyelashes frozen together, her fingers numb inside gloves that had been fine for autumn but were worthless against this February storm that had blown down from the Rockies without warning. She was 22 years old, 4 months pregnant, and completely lost somewhere between the mining camp where her husband had been shot over a card game and Central City, where she'd been told his brother might take her in. Might. That word haunted her almost as much as the memory of Daniel's blood on the saloon floor. The mare stumbled, and Winifred felt herself sliding sideways. She grabbed for the saddle horn, but her hands wouldn't close properly, wouldn't grip, and then she was falling into snow so cold it burned like fire. She tried to get up, tried to call to the horse, but the mare was already disappearing into the white curtain, taking with her the last of Winifred's supplies, her husband's rifle, everything she had left in the world except the clothes on her back and the life inside her. She managed to get to her knees. The wind hit her like a physical blow, knocking her back down. Snow filled her mouth when she tried to scream. This was how she would die then. Frozen in the wilderness, her baby with her, and no one would find them until spring thaw revealed their bodies like secrets the mountain had kept all winter. Through the howling wind, she thought she heard something. A bell, maybe. Or she was already dying, already hearing things that weren't there. She crawled forward anyway because dying while moving seemed better than dying while still. Her hands and knees plunged through the snow, hitting frozen ground that bruised her palms, but she kept going. The sound came again, clearer now. Definitely a bell. Then hands were on her, lifting her, and a voice was saying something she couldn't understand through the wind. She tried to open her eyes, but they were frozen shut. The hands were strong, carrying her, and she smelled leather and wood smoke and horse, smells that meant human, meant shelter, meant maybe not dying after all. Warmth hit her face like a blessing. She was inside somewhere, being laid down on something soft. The hands were pulling off her gloves, rubbing her fingers, and the pain of blood returning to frozen flesh made her cry out. "Easy now," the voice said. Male, low, gentle. "I know it hurts. That means you're not too far gone. Can you open your eyes?" she tried. Her lashes were still frozen together. She felt a warm cloth against her face, melting the ice, and then she could see. The man kneeling beside her was maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled against his collar and eyes the color of the summer sky she might never see again. His face was all hard angles, weathered by sun and wind, with the kind of tan that spoke of years spent outdoors. He wore a wool shirt and suspenders, and his hands on hers were calloused but careful. "There you are," he said, and something in his expression eased. "Thought I'd lost you for a minute. I'm Vincent Walker. This is my ranch, or what passes for one. Can you talk?" Her throat was raw from breathing frozen air, but she managed. "Winifred Everhart." "You alone out there, Mrs. Everhart?" His eyes had dropped to her left hand, to the thin gold band she still wore. "Widow," she said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "He died 3 days ago. I was trying to reach Central City. You were heading the wrong direction. Storm must have turned you around." He was still rubbing her hands, working feeling back into them. "Central City's 10 miles east. You were heading north, straight into the high country. Another hour and you'd have been past the tree line. Nothing up there but snow and death." My horse ran off. I'll look for her when the storm breaks. Right now, I need to get you warm. Can you stand?" She tried. Her legs were wooden, refusing to bend properly, and she would have fallen if he hadn't caught her. He lifted her easily, carrying her across a small cabin toward a stone fireplace where flames danced and crackled. He set her down in a chair near the fire, then started unlacing her boots. "These are soaked through," he said. "Your feet are going to hurt like hell when they warm up. I've got dry socks and I'll heat some water for you to soak them in." He paused, his hands stilling on her boot laces. "Madam, I should tell you we're going to be here a while. This storm's a bad one. Could last 2-3 days, and I'm alone out here. My hired man went to town last week and the storm caught him there, so it's just me. I'll sleep in the barn, keep everything proper, but I wanted you to know the situation." Winifred almost laughed. Propriety. As if that mattered when death had been seconds away. "I don't care about proper right now, Mr. Walker. I care about staying alive." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe. He nodded and went back to her boots, pulling them off carefully. Her stockings were frozen to her feet. He peeled them away and she bit her lip to keep from crying out. Her toes were white, bloodless. "Not frostbit yet," he said, examining them with the careful attention of someone who knew what to look for. "You're lucky. Damn lucky." He looked up at her and his expression was serious. "How far along are you?" She should have been shocked that he'd noticed, but she was too tired, too cold, too grateful to be alive. 4 months. He nodded slowly. "I'll fix you something to eat. You need to get your strength back for you and the baby both." He stood, moving toward a small kitchen area. "There's a curtain you can pull around that chair for privacy while you change. I'll set out some dry clothes. They'll be too big, but they're warm." Over the next hour, as the storm raged outside and the cabin shook with the force of the wind, Vincent Walker proved himself to be a man of quiet competence. He brought her dry clothes that smelled of soap and sunshine, a button-up shirt and woolen pants with a drawstring waist. He heated water for her feet and made her a meal of salt pork and beans and fresh bread that tasted better than anything she'd eaten in weeks. He asked no questions, didn't pry, just let her eat and warm herself while he moved around the cabin tending to small tasks. The cabin itself was simple but well built. One large room with the fireplace at one end and a bed at the other, a kitchen area along one wall and a table with 2 chairs in the middle. Everything was neat, organized, the home of a man who lived alone and took care of his things. Through the window, she could see nothing but white. The world had disappeared. "How did you find me?" she asked finally, when her feet had stopped hurting and the food had warmed her from the inside. He was sitting at the table, mending a piece of harness by lamplight. "Heard my bell going crazy. I've got a mare who's about to foal any day now, and I hung a bell in her stall so I'd know when her time came. When I heard it clanging, I thought she'd started her labor. Went out to the barn and found she'd just spooked at something. Then I heard your horse outside, scared out of her mind. I got her into a stall and figured someone had to be nearby, so I went looking. Found you about 50 yards from my fence line. You saved my life," Winifred said. "Mine and my baby's." He looked up from his work, met her eyes. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone. Not everyone's kind to strangers." She touched her belly, a protective gesture that had become habit. "My husband and I were prospecting up in the mountains. We'd heard about a new claim opening up near Nevada City. Daniel thought we could make our fortune. Instead, he got into a fight with a man who said he was cheating at cards. He wasn't. Daniel never cheated at anything in his life. But the man was drunk and angry, and he shot my husband before anyone could stop him." Vincent's hands had stilled on the harness. "I'm sorry. The marshal arrested him, but that doesn't bring Daniel back." She swallowed hard. "Daniel's brother lives in Central City, or lived there last we heard. I thought he might help me at least until the baby comes. After that, I don't know. I can work. I'm not afraid of hard labor, but I don't know who'll hire a woman with a newborn and no husband. You don't have any other family. My parents died of cholera when I was 16. Daniel and I married the next year. He was all I had. She looked down at her hands, at the ring that suddenly felt too heavy. I don't even know if his brother is still in Central City. We lost touch 2 years ago. He might be dead or moved on, or might not want anything to do with his brother's widow. The wind howled outside, making the windows rattle. Vincent stood, moving to check the fire, adding another log. "Storm like this, it changes things," he said, not looking at her. "Clears away what came before, makes you think about what comes next. You're welcome to stay here until it passes, Mrs. Everhart. After that, we'll figure out where you need to go." That night, Winifred lay in Vincent Walker's bed while he slept in the barn despite her protests, and she listened to the storm try to tear the world apart. She thought about Daniel, about the plans they'd made, the future they'd imagined. They were going to have a little house somewhere, maybe in California where the weather was mild. They were going to have 3 children, a boy and 2 girls. Daniel was going to strike it rich, and they were going to be happy forever. Instead, she was alone in a stranger's cabin in the middle of a Colorado blizzard, and Daniel was in a grave somewhere she'd never find again. Life, she thought, had a cruel way of destroying plans. She must have slept, because when she woke, pale light was seeping through the windows and the wind had died to a low moan. The cabin was cold, the fire burned down to embers. She got up, wrapping a blanket around herself, and tried to coax the flames back to life. She was kneeling before the fireplace, feeding kindling to the reluctant embers, when the door opened and Vincent came in with an armload of wood and a blast of cold air. "Storm's easing," he said, kicking the door shut behind him. "Should blow itself out by tonight." He saw her at the fireplace and crossed to her quickly, setting down the wood. "You should have called me. You need to rest." "I've been resting. I need to be useful." She sat back on her heels, watching the kindling catch. "I can't just be a burden." "You're not a burden." He fed larger pieces of wood to the growing fire. "You're someone who needed help, and I helped. That's what people do out here. We take care of each other because if we don't, we all die." Over breakfast, beans and coffee and yesterday's bread toasted over the fire, Vincent told her about his ranch. He'd come to Colorado 5 years ago with his father and older brother, planning to raise cattle in the mountain valleys. His father had died the first winter, pneumonia, and his brother had gone back east, unable to handle the isolation and the hard work. Vincent had stayed, building the ranch slowly, buying cattle when he could afford them, breaking horses to sell to the mining camps. "It's not much yet," he said, staring into his coffee cup. 20 head of cattle, 3 horses besides my own, and a barn that leaks when the snow melts, but it's mine. I built it with my own hands, and every year it gets a little better." "That's more than most people have," Winifred said. "Something that's truly yours." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not pity. Recognition, maybe. The understanding of one lonely person seeing another. The day passed slowly. The storm had trapped them together. 2 strangers learning the rhythms of each other's presence. Vincent went out periodically to check on the animals, coming back with reports that the pregnant mare was getting close, that the cattle were sheltered in the North Hollow, that Winifred's horse was in the barn, safe and fed. Winifred tried to make herself useful, mending a tear in one of Vincent's shirts, mixing dough for fresh bread. Her hands remembered the domestic tasks that had filled her days before Daniel decided they should try their luck in the mining camps. "You don't have to do that," Vincent said, watching her work the dough. I need to. She needed harder, working out tensions that had nothing to do with bread. I need to feel like I'm paying you back somehow. There's nothing to pay back. There is. She stopped kneading, her hands still on the dough. You saved my life, Mr. Walker. You took me in when you didn't have to, when doing so meant giving up your own bed and sleeping in a barn in the middle of a blizzard. I don't have money to pay you, but I can do this. Please let me do this. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. If it makes you feel better, but call me Vincent. Mr. Walker was my father. Then you should call me Winifred or Winnie if you prefer. That's what Daniel called me. Something crossed his face at the mention of her dead husband, but it was gone before she could rate it. Winnie, he said, trying it out. It suits you. That night, the storm finally died. Winifred stood at the window looking out at a world transformed. Snow covered everything, smooth and white and perfect, glittering in the moonlight that broke through the thinning clouds. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, this landscape that had tried to kill her. It's too deep to travel yet, Vincent said from behind her. Roads won't be passable for at least a few days. You're stuck here a while longer, I'm afraid. I'm not afraid, she said, and realized it was true. She should be. She was alone with a strange man in the middle of nowhere, with no way to leave and no one who knew where she was. But Vincent had proven himself trustworthy. More than that, she felt safe with him in a way she hadn't felt safe in months, maybe longer. I should check on the mare, he said. Want to come with me, get some fresh air? The barn was warm, heated by the bodies of the animals and thick with the smell of hay and horse. The pregnant mare stood in the largest stall, her belly huge, her sides heaving slightly. Vincent moved to her with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this before, running his hands over her swollen sides, murmuring soft words. Tonight, I think, he said. Maybe tomorrow at the latest. She's a good mare, strong. This'll be her third foal. The other two were easy births. Winifred watched him with the horse, saw the gentleness in his touch, the patience. You love this, she said. The animals, the ranch, all of it. I do. He looked at her over the mare's back. Some men go looking for gold in the mountains. Me, I figure the gold is right here. Good land, healthy animals, a solid roof over your head. That's worth more than any nugget you might pull out of a stream. Daniel thought differently. He wanted us to be rich, wanted to give me everything. She wrapped her arms around herself. I just wanted him alive. Vincent came around the mare, stopping a few feet from her. You must have loved him very much. I did, I do. She looked up at him. Is that wrong to still love someone who's dead? No, his voice was soft. Love doesn't die just because a person does. It would be strange if you didn't still love him. They stood there in the warm barn with the animals shifting in their stalls and the moonlight coming through the gaps in the walls, and Winifred felt something inside her chest crack open just a little. She'd been holding everything so tight since Daniel died, holding herself together by sheer force of will, and suddenly she couldn't hold anymore. She started crying, great wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep inside, and Vincent caught her when her knees buckled. He held her while she cried, one hand on her back, the other cradling her head against his chest. He didn't say anything, didn't tell her it would be okay or that time healed all wounds. He just held her and let her grieve, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. When the storm inside her finally passed, she pulled back, embarrassed. I'm sorry, I got your shirt all wet. It'll dry. He handed her a handkerchief. Feel better? Actually, yes. She wiped her face. I haven't cried since it happened. I couldn't because I had to be strong, had to keep moving, had to survive. But I needed to cry. My ma used to say that tears water the soul the way rain waters the earth. Let things grow again after a hard season. Your mother was a wise woman. She was. He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger. She'd have liked you. She always said a woman who could knead bread properly was worth her weight in gold. They walked back to the cabin through snow that came up to Winifred's knees, Vincent breaking trail for her. The night was clear now, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, the moon so bright it cast shadows. Their breath steamed in the cold air. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and the sound sent shivers down Winifred's spine that had nothing to do with cold. "They won't come near the ranch," Vincent said, seeing her reaction. "Too many human smells, and the cattle stay close to the barn this time of year, but I'll keep my rifle handy just in case." Inside, he built up the fire while she made coffee. They sat at the table, not talking, just sharing the comfortable silence of two people who'd moved past being strangers but weren't quite sure what they were to each other yet. "Can I ask you something?" Winifred said finally. "Anything. Why are you alone out here? A man like you with a ranch and your whole life ahead of you, why haven't you married?" He turned his coffee cup in his hands, watching the liquid swirl. "I was engaged once, back in Illinois before we came west. Her name was Catherine, and we'd been promised to each other since we were children. But when I said I was going to Colorado with my father and brother, she told me to choose, her or the West. I chose the West. You regret it, sometimes, mostly on nights when the wind howls and the loneliness feels like it might swallow me whole." He looked up at her. "But then I think about what my life would have been back there. Working in a factory, living in a house that looked exactly like every other house on the street, spending Sundays at church and Wednesday nights at social clubs, everything planned and predictable until the day I died. And I know I made the right choice. I'd rather be lonely and free than comfortable and caged." "Freedom's an expensive thing," Winifred said softly. "Sometimes it costs everything you have. So does comfort. Different currency, that's all." They talked late into the night, swapping stories of their lives, their families, their dreams. Winifred told him about growing up in Missouri, about her parents' farm and the cholera epidemic that swept through their county the summer. She was 16, killing a third of the population, including her mother and father. She told him about meeting Daniel at the church where they'd held the mass funeral, how he'd been kind to her when she had no one, how they'd married more out of mutual loneliness than passionate love, but had grown to care for each other deeply. Vincent told her about his childhood in Illinois, about a father who dreamed of open spaces and a mother who died trying to give him one more child, about a brother who loved books more than land and had gone back east to become a lawyer. He told her about the first winter in Colorado, when they'd lived in a tent and nearly starved, about building the cabin with his father, log by log, about the morning he'd found his father dead in his bed, gone peaceful in his sleep, and how he'd had to dig the grave alone in frozen ground. "You've had a hard life," Winifred said when he finished. "No harder than most out here, easier than some." He stood, stretching. "It's late. You should get some sleep. You and the baby need rest, Vincent." She stood too, catching his hand. "Thank you, not just for saving me, but for this. For talking to me like I'm a person, not just a burden or a charity case." His hand was warm in hers, calloused and strong. "You're not a burden, Winnie. You're—" He trailed off, seeming to struggle with words. "You're the first person I've talked to, really talked to, in longer than I can remember. So I should be thanking you." The next morning, Vincent went out early to check the trap line he'd set before the storm. He came back with 2 rabbits, which Winifred skinned and cleaned while he went to check on the mare. The domestic routine felt natural, comfortable, like something they'd been doing for years rather than days. Winifred found herself humming while she worked, an old song her mother used to sing, and realized with a start that she felt something close to happy, The thought brought immediate guilt. How could she be happy when Daniel was barely cold in his grave? What kind of wife was she, to find contentment in another man's home not a week after her husband's death? But the baby kicked inside her, a flutter like butterfly wings, and she thought about what Vincent had said about watering the soul. Maybe she was allowed to have moments of peace even in grief. Maybe that's what survival meant. Vincent came back from the barn with news that the mare was in early labor, pacing her stall and pawing the ground. "Could be hours yet," he said, "but I should stay close." "Will you be all right here alone for a while?" "I'll be fine. I'll make dinner, have it ready when you come in." He nodded but hesitated at the door. "Winnie, I want you to know something. However long you need to stay here, it's all right. A few days, a few weeks, whatever it takes. You're not imposing and you're not taking advantage. You're welcome here." After he left, Winifred stood in the quiet cabin and let herself acknowledge what she'd been avoiding since she woke up that first morning. She was attracted to Vincent Walker, more than attracted. She felt drawn to him in a way that went beyond gratitude for rescue. When he smiled at her, her heart beat faster. When he spoke, she found herself hanging on his words. When he'd held her last night in the barn while she cried, she'd felt safer than she'd felt in her entire marriage. And that terrified her. She was pregnant with her dead husband's child. She had no business feeling anything for any man, least of all the one who'd saved her life out of simple human decency. Whatever she thought she felt was just confusion, just her mind seeking comfort in a terrible time. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But when Vincent came in hours later, exhausted and grinning, announcing that the mare had delivered a perfect filly, and Winifred's heart leaped at the sight of his joy, she had to admit that maybe it was real after all. Maybe impossible things happened sometimes. Maybe hearts didn't always follow the rules of propriety and proper mourning periods. "You should come see her," Vincent said, his excitement making him seem younger, more carefree. "She's beautiful, all legs and attitude, already trying to stand." In the barn, the new filly was indeed trying to stand, her spindly legs shaking, her mother nickering encouragement. Winifred watched the baby horse struggle and fail and try again and felt her eyes fill with tears. "What's wrong?" Vincent asked, concerned. "Nothing's wrong, everything's right." She wiped her eyes. New life in the middle of winter, it seems like a miracle. Out here, every birth is a miracle. Every day you wake up and the sun rises is a miracle. He moved closer to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "You're a miracle, Winnie. You survived that storm when you shouldn't have. You're still here, still strong, carrying new life of your own. That takes courage I can't even imagine." She turned to look at him and found him closer than she'd expected. Close enough to see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, close enough to count the faint freckles across his nose, close enough to kiss if she just leaned forward a little. The thought shocked her. She stepped back quickly. "I should get back to the cabin. Dinner's probably burning." She fled, and if Vincent was confused by her sudden departure, he was kind enough not to follow. That night, lying in Vincent's bed again while he slept in the barn with the new filly and her mother, Winifred forced herself to think clearly. She was a widow, alone and pregnant, with no money and no prospects. Vincent was offering her shelter out of kindness, nothing more. She couldn't mistake that kindness for something else, couldn't let herself develop feelings that would only complicate an already complicated situation. In a few days, the roads would be clear and she would go to Central City, find Daniel's brother or not, make a life somehow. This interlude with Vincent Walker was just that, an interlude, a brief pause in her journey, but her heart, traitorous thing that it was, wasn't listening to logic. The days fell into a pattern. Vincent rose early to tend the animals, breaking ice on the water troughs, feeding cattle and horses, checking the trap line. Winifred cooked and cleaned and mended, making herself useful, earning her keep. They ate breakfast together, then went their separate ways for the day, coming together again at dinner to share the meal and talk. And they talked about everything. Vincent told her about his dreams for the ranch, how he wanted to expand the herd, build a bigger barn, maybe hire a few men to help with the work. Winifred told him about her life before Daniel, about learning to read in a one-room schoolhouse, about the garden she'd kept at her parents' farm, and how she missed the feel of dirt under her fingernails. They talked about books they'd read, places they wanted to see, foods they loved and hated. They talked about politics and religion and the price of beef in Denver, and somehow even the boring topics became interesting when shared with each other. A week after the storm, Vincent declared the roads probably passable. "I could take you to Central City tomorrow if you want," he said over dinner. "Hitch up the wagon, get you there by late afternoon." Winifred's hand stilled on her fork. Tomorrow, of course. She couldn't stay here forever, couldn't keep imposing on Vincent's hospitality. It was time to move on, to find Daniel's brother, to start figuring out the rest of her life. "All right," she said, and hated how hollow her voice sounded. "Tomorrow, then." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness listening to the cabin settle and creak, knowing this was her last night here, her last night of feeling safe and warm and not alone. Tomorrow she'd be back in the world, facing an uncertain future with nothing but hope and desperation to guide her. Tomorrow she'd leave Vincent Walker behind and probably never see him again. The thought felt like a hand squeezing her heart. She got up, wrapped a blanket around herself, and went to sit by the fire. She'd rebuild it, make some coffee, watch the sun rise. Anything to stop thinking about tomorrow. The door opened, letting in a blast of cold air, and Vincent. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much on my mind, I guess." She watched him close the door, stamp snow off his boots. "You should be sleeping." "Should be, yes." He crossed to the fire, holding his hands out to the flames. "But I keep thinking about tomorrow, about taking you to Central City and then coming back here alone. And I realized I don't want to." Her heart started beating faster. "Don't want to what?" "Come back here alone." He turned to face her, and his expression was raw, honest. "Winnie, I know this is wrong on about 17 different levels. You're a widow, you're pregnant with another man's child, you've been here barely a week. But I have to say this, because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to speak up." "Vincent, don't. I have to." He moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. "You came here in the middle of a blizzard, carrying new life, and somehow you brought spring to my winter. You made this cabin feel like a home instead of just a place I sleep. You made me remember what it's like to have someone to talk to, someone to share meals with, someone who makes me smile just by existing in the same space. And I know you're grieving. I know you loved your husband. I know this is too fast and too soon. But I also know that I'm falling in love with you, and I had to tell you before you walked out of my life tomorrow." Winifred couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect and terrifying. "You don't know me, not really. It's only been a week. I know you're brave. I know you're strong. I know you sing while you cook, and you cry when baby horses are born, and you mend my shirts with stitches so neat they are almost invisible. I know you take your coffee with 2 sugars, and you hate beans, but you eat them anyway because they're what's available. I know you wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, and I can hear you crying even though you try to be quiet. I know you're scared of what comes next, but you're facing it anyway." He reached out carefully and touched her face. "Maybe a week isn't long enough to know everything about a person, but it's long enough to know I want to spend the rest of my life learning the rest. I'm pregnant with Daniel's baby." I know. And I loved him. I still love him. I know that too. I wouldn't want you if you didn't. The fact that you're loyal enough to keep loving someone even after they're gone, that's one of the things I love about you. Tears were streaming down her face. This is crazy. We're crazy. Probably. He smiled, that smile that made him look younger, happier. But everything about this situation is crazy. You nearly died in a blizzard and I happened to hear a bell at exactly the right moment. If that's not fate, I don't know what is. I don't believe in fate. Neither did I. Until you. Winifred closed her eyes, trying to think, but all she could feel was Vincent's hand on her face, warm and steady. All she could hear was his voice saying he was falling in love with her. All she could think was that she was falling too, had been falling since he'd carried her out of the snow, and maybe it was time to stop fighting it. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. She opened her eyes, met his gaze. If I stay, if we try this, it can't be just because I have nowhere else to go. It can't be charity or pity or you feeling responsible for me. It has to be real. It is real. At least it is for me. He searched her face. What about you? Is there any chance you could feel the same way? She thought about the past week, about the way her heart lifted when Vincent came in from the cold, about the sound of his laugh, about how natural it felt to share space with him. She thought about the baby growing inside her, about how Vincent had never once looked at her like her pregnancy was a burden or a problem. She thought about Daniel, about the love they'd shared, and realized that loving him didn't mean she couldn't love someone else. Hearts were big enough for more than one person, more than one love. There's a chance, she said softly. More than a chance. Vincent, I think I'm falling in love with you too, and I don't know if that makes me a terrible person or just a confused one, but it's the truth. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. So you'll stay. You'll give this a chance. I'll stay. We'll take it slow, figure things out as we go, but yes, I'll stay. He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, and she let herself relax into his embrace. It felt right in a way nothing had felt right since Daniel died. It felt like coming home. You've brought spring to my winter, Vincent murmured into her hair. God, Winnie, you've brought spring to my winter. They stood there by the firelight, holding each other, and outside the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. But inside, they were warm. Over the next weeks, as February turned to March and the snow began to melt, Vincent and Winifred built something new together. They were careful with each other, aware of the fragility of what they were creating. Vincent never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. He slept in the barn, keeping things proper, though they both knew propriety was a thin veneer over what they felt. Winifred bloomed like one of the spring flowers beginning to poke through the melting snow. Her belly grew rounder, the baby more active. Vincent would put his hand on her stomach sometimes, feeling the kicks and rolls, and his face would light up with wonder. Does it hurt? He asked one evening when the baby was particularly active. Not hurt exactly. It's strange feeling another life inside you, like I'm sharing my body with someone I haven't met yet. She covered his hand with hers. Does it bother you that the baby isn't yours? No. He said it firmly, without hesitation. That baby's part of you, which means I already love it. And I figure, the way I see it, there's biology and then there's fatherhood. One's an accident of birth, the other's a choice. If you'll let me, I want to choose to be this baby's father. Not to replace Daniel, never that. But to be there, to raise this child, to love it the way it deserves to be loved. Winifred felt tears well up again. She seemed to cry at everything these days, blamed it on pregnancy, but really it was just that Vincent kept saying exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. You're a good man, Vincent Walker. I'm trying to be worthy of you, Winnie Everhart. Spring came in earnest in April, painting the meadows with wildflowers, turning the world green and gold. The cattle grew fat on new grass. The filly, whom they'd named Spring in honor of her birth during the blizzard, grew stronger and bolder. Vincent worked from dawn to dusk, repairing winter damage, tending the herd, planting a garden at Winifred's direction. She worked alongside him when she could, though he worried constantly about her overdoing it. She ignored his worrying, needing to be useful, needing to contribute. She planted seeds she'd found in Vincent's stores, surprised he had them. "My mother sent them," he admitted, "before she died. She thought I'd need a garden out here. I never had time to plant one, didn't see the point when it was just me. But now—" He looked at the neat rows they'd made together. "Now it seems important." In May, Vincent rode to Central City, making inquiries about Daniel's brother. He came back with news that gave them both mixed feelings. "He moved on about 6 months ago," Vincent reported. "Nobody knows where. Heard he went to California, maybe Oregon. Trail's cold." "So I have no family left," Winifred said quietly. "That's not true." Vincent took her hand. "You have me if you want me." "I want you," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. They were married in June by a circuit preacher who came through the area. A simple ceremony with no guests, except the horses and cattle. Winifred wore a dress she'd made from fabric Vincent had bought in town, simple blue cotton that fit over her pregnant belly. Vincent wore his best shirt and shaved for the first time in weeks. They spoke their vows in the meadow behind the cabin, with wildflowers at their feet and mountains all around, and when the preacher said Vincent could kiss his bride, they sealed their promise with a kiss that tasted like forever. "Mrs. Walker," Vincent said when they were alone again, trying out her new name. "Mr. Walker," she replied, and they both laughed at the strangeness of it. That night, properly married, they shared the bed for the first time. Vincent was gentle, careful of her pregnancy, treating her like something precious and breakable. But Winifred was neither precious nor breakable, and she showed him that, showed him the passion that had been building between them for months, showed him that she was his completely. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, she said, "I need to tell you something, anything. I love Daniel. I'll always love him. He was good to me when I had nothing, and he gave me this baby. But what I feel for you is different, bigger somehow, more complete. With Daniel, I was grateful and fond and loyal. With you, I'm on fire. You're everything I didn't know I needed." Vincent kissed her forehead. "I'll take that. I'll take whatever you can give me and count myself the luckiest man alive." The baby came in July, during a thunderstorm that shook the cabin and filled the air with electricity. Vincent rode for the midwife in Central City, but the birth came too fast, and in the end it was just the two of them. Vincent coaching Winifred through the pains, catching the baby when it finally slipped into the world. "A boy," Vincent said, his voice choked with emotion. "Winnie, you have a son." She held the baby to her chest, overwhelmed by the rush of love that filled her. He was perfect, red and wrinkled and screaming his fury at being forced from his warm cocoon. He had Daniel's dark hair in her eyes, and she felt her heart expand to hold this new love. "Daniel," she said. "We'll call him Daniel after his father, Daniel Vincent." Vincent's eyes were wet. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. His father deserves to be remembered and you deserve to be honored. Daniel Vincent Walker." She looked up at her husband. "Our son." "Our son," Vincent repeated, and when he took the baby in his arms, holding him carefully, looking down at the tiny face with absolute devotion, Winifred knew she'd made the right choice. This was her family now. This was home. The years that followed were good ones, full of hard work and simple joys. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Vincent hired 2 men to help with the cattle and built a bigger barn to replace the one that leaked. They added rooms to the cabin, turning it from a simple one-room structure to a proper house. The garden flourished under Winifred's care, providing vegetables through summer and fall. Young Daniel grew strong and healthy, a laughing child who followed Vincent everywhere, calling him Papa with complete confidence. When he was old enough to ask about the man he was named for, Winifred told him the truth. "Your birth father was a good man who loved you before you were even born. He died trying to give us a better life. But your Papa, Vincent, he's the one who chose to be your father. He's the one who's raising you and loving you and teaching you to be a good man yourself. You're lucky, Daniel. You have two fathers, both of them good men." Daniel seemed to accept this easily, in the way children do. Vincent was Papa, the man who taught him to ride and rope and mend fences. The other Daniel, the one in the stories Mama told, was more like a guardian angel, watching over him from somewhere beyond. In the spring of 1881, 3 years after Winifred arrived in the blizzard, she gave Vincent a daughter. They named her Sarah Rose, after Vincent's mother and Winifred's. Sarah had her father's blue eyes and her mother's golden hair, and she came into the world squalling her displeasure at being born at all. She was, from the very beginning, a force of nature. "We're going to have our hands full with this one," Vincent said, walking the floor with his screaming daughter at 2 in the morning. "Worth it, though," Winifred said sleepily from the bed. "Absolutely worth it." More children followed. A son they named Thomas in 1883, quieter than his siblings, thoughtful and gentle. Twin girls in 1885, Mary and Margaret, identical in appearance but opposite in temperament. Another son in 1887, William, who came out laughing and hardly ever stopped. The cabin, expanded multiple times, became a proper house, sprawling and comfortable, filled with the noise and chaos of a large family. The ranch prospered. Vincent's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were never rich, but they were comfortable, which was more than most could say. On their 10th anniversary, Vincent took Winifred on a picnic to the meadow where they'd been married. The children were old enough to be left with the hired men for an afternoon, and it was the first time they'd been alone together in months. "Remember when it was just us?" Vincent asked, lying in the grass beside her, watching clouds drift overhead. "Barely, seems like a lifetime ago." She turned her head to look at him. "Do you miss it, the quiet?" "Sometimes. Mostly I'm grateful." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I was so lonely before you came. I didn't even realize how lonely until you were here. You saved me, Winnie, just as much as I saved you." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That's how it works. That's how love works." They lay there in the meadow, holding hands, surrounded by wildflowers and memories. 10 years since that terrible blizzard that had brought them together. 10 years of building a life, a family, a love that had weathered storms both literal and figurative. "You know what I remember most?" Winifred said. "From that first week." "What?" "The moment you said I'd brought spring to your winter. That's when I knew. That's when I realized I was falling in love with you. Funny, that's the moment I knew too." He rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "Best thing I ever did, going out in that storm to look for you. Best thing I ever did, not dying." They laughed, and then they were kissing, and then they were making love in the meadow like newlyweds, and for a little while the years fell away and it was just the two of them again, young and in love and full of hope for the future. The children grew. Daniel, the eldest, showed an aptitude for ranching that made Vincent's chest swell with pride. At 14, he could rope and brand as well as any of the hired men. But he also had his birth father's wanderlust, and Winifred knew that someday he'd want to see what lay beyond the mountains. She was already preparing herself for that day. Sarah became the heart of the family, fierce and loving in equal measure, bossing her younger siblings with the authority of a general and defending them with the ferocity of a mother bear. She wanted to be a teacher, she declared at 12, wanted to open a school in Central City and educate all the children whose parents couldn't afford to send them east. Thomas loved books and music, teaching himself to play a battered guitar Vincent had bought from a traveling merchant. He'd sit on the porch in the evenings, playing and singing, and the whole family would gather to listen. He talked about going to Denver, maybe studying music properly, but he was only 10 and had time to dream. The twins, Mary and Margaret, were 7 and inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and communicating in a language only they understood. William, at 5, was all energy and mischief, getting into everything, keeping everyone on their toes. In the fall of 1889, when Daniel was 11 and Sarah was 8 and the house was full to bursting, Winifred discovered she was pregnant again. She was 33 now, and this pregnancy felt different, harder. She was tired all the time, her back ached constantly, and the baby seemed to press on every organ she had. Vincent worried, fussing over her like she was made of glass. "Maybe we should send for a doctor from Denver," he said, "just to be safe." "I've had 5 healthy babies already," Winifred pointed out. "I know what I'm doing. You were younger then. I'm not ancient, Vincent. I'm perfectly capable of having another baby." But when her time came in March of 1890, things went wrong. The baby was turned wrong, the birth taking far too long, and by the time the midwife managed to turn the baby and get it out, Winifred had lost too much blood. The baby, another son, was perfect and healthy, but Winifred was gray and weak, drifting in and out of consciousness. "You need to name him," she whispered to Vincent, holding their new son for the first time. "I'm too tired to think." "Don't talk like that, you're going to be fine. Promise me you'll take care of them, all of them. Promise me." "Winnie, no." His voice broke. "You're not leaving me." "I won't let you. It's not up to you." She touched his face, this man she'd loved for 12 years. "I love you, Vincent Walker. You made my life beautiful. You took me in when I was nothing and gave me everything. You brought spring to my winter," he said, tears streaming down his face. "You can't leave now, it's still spring. It'll always be spring with you." She smiled, though it cost her. "Then I'll never really leave. Spring always comes back." But she fought, because she had 6 children who needed her and a husband who loved her and a life she wasn't ready to leave. She fought through the fever, and the weakness and the way her body seemed determined to quit. She fought for 3 days while Vincent held her hand and prayed to a God he'd never been quite sure he believed in, making bargains and promises if only she'd be allowed to stay. And on the 4th day the fever broke. Color returned to her face. Her eyes opened, clear and focused. "Vincent, I'm here. I'm right here. The baby, he's fine. Perfect. All the children are fine. They're waiting to see you." She took a shaky breath. "I thought I was going to die." "So did I. Don't ever do that to me again." "I'll try not to." She squeezed his hand weakly. "Did you name him?" "I waited for you, wanted us to do it together." "Nathan," she said. "That means gift from God, doesn't it? He's our gift, our reminder to be grateful for every day. Nathan Walker." "I like it." Vincent carefully passed her the baby, watching as she cradled him. "I meant what I said, you know, about it always being spring with you. You came into my life in a blizzard, carrying new life, and you've been bringing spring ever since. Spring and hope and love and everything good. I can't lose you, Winnie. I need you too much." "You're not going to lose me. I'm too stubborn to die." She recovered slowly, and Vincent was there for every step, taking over the household with the help of Daniel and Sarah, cooking meals and changing diapers and keeping the younger children from overwhelming their mother. The ranch hands stepped up too. working extra hours without being asked, making sure the ranch kept running while the family focused on healing. By summer, Winifred was back on her feet, still weaker than before but alive, and determined to make the most of every day she'd been given. Nathan thrived, a calm baby who seemed content to just observe the chaos of his large family. The years continued their march. The children grew into young adults, each finding their own path. Daniel, at 18, announced he wanted to see California, wanted to try his hand at something besides ranching. Vincent gave him his blessing and enough money to get started, and they all stood waving as he rode away toward his own future. Sarah did become a teacher, opening a small school in Central City when she was 20, teaching reading and writing and arithmetic to children whose parents worked the mines and couldn't spare time for education. She married a banker named Robert Chen, a Chinese man whose family had come to work the railroads and stayed. The marriage caused some raised eyebrows in town, but Sarah, fierce as ever, told anyone who had a problem with it exactly where they could go. Vincent and Winifred welcomed Robert into the family with open arms, gaining not just a son-in-law but a good friend. Thomas went to Denver at 16, studying music and coming home with stories of the city that seemed impossibly far from their ranch life. He played in theaters and saloons, making a name for himself, sending money home when he could. The twins followed Sarah into teaching, opening their own school closer to home. William, true to his energetic nature, became a horse trader, traveling throughout Colorado and beyond, always on the move. Nathan, the youngest, the child who nearly cost Winifred her life, showed an aptitude for the kind of careful ranch management that Vincent had spent years perfecting. At 10, he could tell you which cattle were likely to have trouble calving, which horses needed extra feed, when to rotate pastures. He was quiet and thoughtful, and it was clear he'd be the one to take over the ranch when Vincent was ready to step back. In the summer of 1905, Vincent and Winifred celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary. They were in their 50s now, weathered by years of hard work and mountain living, but still strong, still together. Their children were grown and scattered, coming home for visits with grandchildren in tow. The ranch had grown to 200 head of cattle, the largest in the county. "Remember when you found me in the blizzard?" Winifred asked. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, the same porch where they'd sat countless times over the years. "I remember every detail. You were nearly frozen, more dead than alive. I thought I was going to lose you before I even knew you. I was so scared. Scared of dying, scared of being alone, scared of what would happen to my baby if I didn't make it. And now look at you. 6 children, more grandchildren than I can count, a ranch that's thriving. You survived, Winnie, more than survived. You flourished." "We flourished," she corrected. "We built this together." "You brought spring to my winter," Vincent said, the words as true now as they'd been 27 years ago. "You still do, every single day." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned gold and pink and purple, the colors of sunset painting the world beautiful. Somewhere in the house, Nathan was making dinner, humming as he worked. In town, their other children were living their lives, making their own springs. And here on the porch of the house they'd built together, Vincent and Winifred Walker held hands and watched the day end, grateful for every moment they'd been given. "You ever wonder what would have happened if that storm hadn't blown in?" Winifred asked. "If I'd made it to Central City, found Daniel's brother, made a life there. Sometimes. But then I think about how I'd still be alone in this cabin, going through the motions, waiting for something I couldn't even name, and I'm grateful for that storm. Grateful for every terrible thing that had to happen to bring you to me. Even me losing Daniel. No, Never that. But grateful that when you needed someone, I was there. Grateful that we found each other in the middle of a blizzard and somehow built a life together. Winifred leaned her head on his shoulder. I love you, Vincent Walker. Thank you for saving me. I love you, Winnie Walker. Thank you for letting me. The grandchildren came in the fall, all of them descending on the ranch for a massive family gathering. Daniel rode in from California with his wife and 3 children, looking prosperous and happy. Sarah and Robert came from Central City with their 2 daughters. Thomas brought a woman he introduced as his fiancée, a pianist from Denver with kind eyes and a quick laugh. The twins came together as always, their families mixing and mingling until no one could tell which children belonged to which twin. William showed up with a different woman than the last time, laughing when his siblings teased him about his inability to settle down. And Nathan, still living at the ranch, helped organize everything with the calm competence that was his trademark. The house was chaos, children running everywhere, adults trying to catch up on years apart, meals prepared for 20 people at a time. Vincent and Winifred sat in the middle of it all, watching their legacy play out in front of them, and felt blessed beyond measure. On the last night before everyone scattered again, they gathered in the meadow, building a bonfire and telling stories. The children begged for tales of the old days, and Winifred found herself telling the story she'd told 100 times before but never got tired of telling. Your father saved my life, she said, looking at the faces of her children and grandchildren in the firelight. I was lost in a blizzard, pregnant and alone, and I should have died. But your father heard a bell at exactly the right moment, and he came looking for me, and he brought me inside and saved me. And then he did something even more remarkable. He fell in love with me, even though I was carrying another man's child, even though I was broken and grieving. He chose to love me, and he chose to love Daniel, your oldest brother, as his own son. He chose to build a family with me to make a life together. That's the kind of man your father is. The kind who saves people, the kind who loves without limits. Tell them what I said, Vincent prompted, smiling. He said I'd brought spring to his winter, and I guess I did in a way, but he brought spring to mine too. He gave me a reason to keep living when I wanted to give up. He gave me all of you. He gave me a home and a family and a love that's lasted almost 30 years now. That's the real story. Not just that he saved me from a blizzard, but that we saved each other from loneliness. That we found each other when we both needed finding, and we built something beautiful together. The children were quiet, even the youngest ones sensing the weight of the story. Then Daniel, the eldest, spoke up. I'm glad you found each other. Glad he saved you. Because otherwise I wouldn't exist, and neither would any of us. That's exactly right, Vincent said. Everything happens for a reason, even the bad things. Your mother's first husband died, and that was terrible. She nearly froze to death in a blizzard, and that was terrible too. But those terrible things led her to me, and led me to her, and led to all of you. So maybe the secret is to survive the terrible things, keep moving forward, and trust that something good is waiting on the other side. Nathan, quiet Nathan, who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say, added, You taught us that, both of you. You taught us to be strong, to keep going, to take care of each other. That's your real legacy. Not the ranch or the money or any of that. It's that you showed us how to love. Winifred felt tears streaming down her face, the good kind, the kind that came from overwhelming happiness. She looked around the circle of her family, these people she'd helped create, these lives she'd shaped, and felt a sense of completion she'd never experienced before. This was what it had all been for. The pain and the loss and the fear, they'd all led to this moment, this family, this love. Vincent's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. Spring, he murmured in her ear. You brought spring to my winter, and now it's eternal spring. Look at what we made, Winnie. Look at what our love created." She looked, and she saw children and grandchildren, saw the ranch stretching out under the stars, saw the mountains standing eternal watch, saw the life they'd built from nothing but hope and determination and love. She saw spring, endless spring, blooming in the faces of her family. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Everything's so beautiful." They stayed up late that night, telling stories and singing songs and making memories. The next morning, everyone scattered again back to their own lives, but the feeling of family remained. They'd gather again at Christmas, maybe next summer too, and the pattern would continue as long as they all lived. The years rolled on. Vincent and Winifred grew older, their bodies slowing but their love remaining strong. They handed over most of the ranch work to Nathan, who ran things with the same careful attention his father had shown. They became the grandparents everyone wanted to visit, full of stories and wisdom and unconditional love. In the winter of 1910, 32 years after the blizzard that had brought them together, Vincent fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it settled in his lungs and refused to leave. By March he was bedridden, struggling to breathe, and they all knew what was coming. The children gathered, coming home one last time. They took turns sitting with him, holding his hand, telling him they loved him. And through it all, Winifred was there, never leaving his side the same way he'd never left hers all those years ago. "I'm not ready to leave you," he whispered one night when it was just the two of them. "I know. I'm not ready to let you go either. Promise me you'll be all right. Promise me you'll keep bringing spring." "I promise. But Vincent, you're not leaving. You're going to get better. You're going to be fine." But they both knew she was lying. And they both knew he was dying, and all they could do was hold each other and be grateful for the years they'd had. He died on a Tuesday morning in April, just as the sun was rising, with Winifred holding his hand and their children gathered around. His last words were, "Spring. You brought spring." And then he was gone. The grief was enormous, crushing, but Winifred had survived grief before and she would survive it again. They buried Vincent in the meadow where they'd been married, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The whole county came to the funeral, testament to the life he'd lived, the respect he'd earned. Winifred stood at his grave and spoke the words she'd needed to say. "You saved me twice, once from a blizzard and once from loneliness. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible, a family I never thought I'd have. You loved me when I was broken and you helped me heal. You raised a child that wasn't yours by blood as if he was, and you gave me 5 more beautiful children. You were the best man I've ever known, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond. Thank you, Vincent Walker. Thank you for everything." The grief, dulled over time, became something she could carry instead of something that crushed her. She stayed at the ranch, helping Nathan run things, being a grandmother to the growing horde of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She tended the garden Vincent had helped her plant 40 years ago, still producing vegetables every summer. She sat on the porch every evening and watched the sun set, feeling Vincent's presence beside her even though he was gone. Winifred lived another 15 years after Vincent died, long enough to see the world change in ways they never could have imagined. Automobiles became common, though she never learned to drive one. Electricity came to Central City, though the ranch stayed with oil lamps. The Great War happened far away in Europe, and she prayed every day that her grandsons serving over there would come home safe, and they did. She died peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1925 at the age of 69, surrounded by family. Her last words, spoken to Nathan, who'd been keeping vigil by her bedside, were about Vincent. "I see him," she said, her eyes focused on something no one else could see. "He's waiting for me." And it's spring, Nathan. Everything's spring. They buried her next to Vincent in the meadow, and if the marker stone said she'd brought spring to his winter, well, it was nothing but the truth. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations. The story of the blizzard and the cowboy and the new life became family legend, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But it was all true, every word. Winifred Everhart Walker had arrived in a blizzard carrying new life, and Vincent Walker had fallen in love with her and saved her. And together they'd built something that lasted long after they were both gone. The house still stands, modified and modernized, but essentially the same cabin Vincent built with his father all those years ago. The meadow still blooms with wildflowers every spring. The descendants of Vincent and Winifred still work the ranch, still tell the stories, still feel the presence of those two people who found each other in the middle of a winter storm and created an eternal spring. Because that's what love does. It takes the frozen wasteland of loneliness and transforms it into blooming meadows. It takes two broken people and makes them whole. It survives blizzards and grief and the passage of time itself. It creates new life, not just in babies but in hearts that learn to beat again after they thought they were dead. Vincent and Winifred Walker found spring in each other's arms during the worst winter storm Colorado had seen in a generation. And that spring lasted for decades, spreading to their children and their children's children, warming everyone it touched. They proved that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead directly to the best ones. That survival is just the first step toward flourishing. That love can bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances. Their grave markers stand side by side in the meadow, weathered by years of mountain weather but still legible. Vincent's reads simply, "He saved a life in a blizzard and found his own salvation." Winifred says, "She brought spring to his winter and summer to his soul." And every spring, when the wildflowers bloom and the snow melts and new life appears everywhere you look, the family gathers in that meadow and remembers the love story that started it all. They remember the blizzard and the cowboy and the pregnant widow who should have died but didn't. They remember the choice to love despite grief, to build despite loss, to create spring in the middle of winter. They remember, and in remembering, they ensure that the spring Vincent and Winifred created together never truly ends. It lives on in every descendant who finds love, every child who's born, every act of kindness that ripples outward. It lives on in the very ground beneath their feet, in the mountains standing watch, in the eternal cycle of seasons that proves winter always gives way to spring if you're patient enough to wait for it. That's the legacy of Winifred Everhart Walker and Vincent Walker. Not just a ranch or a family tree, but the knowledge that love conquers everything if you're brave enough to let it. That new life can bloom even in the harshest conditions. That sometimes the person who saves you is the one who needs saving just as much. That home isn't a place but a person, and family is what you build with your own hands and heart. The story that began with a gunshot and a blizzard ended with peace and completion, and a love that transcended death itself. It's a story of the Wild West, of survival and determination and the indomitable human spirit. But mostly, it's a love story, pure and simple. The best kind of love story, the kind that's true. And if on quiet spring evenings when the wind blows just right through the meadow where they're buried, people swear they can hear voices on the breeze, voices laughing and loving and living still, well, maybe that's just the wind. Or maybe it's Vincent and Winifred still together, still bringing spring to each other's winters, still proving that true love never really ends. It just transforms, like winter transforming to spring, death transforming to memory, grief transforming to gratitude for the years you had. The blizzard that brought them together was terrible and beautiful, like so much of life. But what came after, what they built in the warmth and safety of each other's love, that was purely beautiful without qualification or caveat. Winifred arrived in a blizzard carrying new life, and Vincent said she brought spring to his winter. But the truth, the deeper truth that took them a lifetime to fully understand, was that they brought spring to each other. That's what love does. That's what it's always done. It transforms winter to spring, death to life, loneliness to belonging. It saves us and we save it, and together we create something that lasts forever. That's their story. That's their truth. And it echoes still through the mountains of Colorado, through the descendants who carry their names and their blood, through the very earth they walked and worked and loved upon. The blizzard is long forgotten except in family stories, but the spring they created together blooms eternal, proof that love, real love, the kind worth having, never truly dies. It just keeps blooming, season after season, generation after generation, forever and always.